In this chapter, we will talk about culture, elements of culture, what exactly culture is, and we'll talk a little bit about the media, kind of the way media can influence culture and the way culture can influence the media. As sociologists, when we are studying culture, we are insiders to that culture, but we cannot be completely taken by that view. We should study culture as insiders, but understand it as outsiders. When we're able to understand it as outsiders, it allows us to analyze and measure its significance in the society. So therefore, as sociologists, we kind of have to separate ourselves when it comes to the judgment. Culture refers to ways of thinking, the ways of acting, and the material objects that together form a people's way of thinking. It's a complex system of meaning and behavior. Culture is a human strategy for survival. And in fact, you have to have culture in order for humans to be able to survive. When sociologists speak about culture, they refer to the values that members of a group hold, their norms, the languages they speak, their symbols, and the material and non-material objects that they create. Values are abstract ideas about what is right and what is wrong. An example of a value that Western societies have is for the fidelity in marriage to a single person. Values are reflected in a culture's norm. Norms are actually expectations about how people ought to behave. Norms can be very formal, meaning that they're written down somewhere and may even be codified into law. Such laws that guide when the ending of a marriage occurs. And the relations with children when a partner has been unfaithful. Or norms can be informal, meaning they're not written down anywhere, but such as how one is supposed to behave on a crowded elevator. For example, when you're on a crowded elevator, think about what do you do? Do you normally engage in conversation? Do you stare at people? Or do you maybe kind of push the button or start looking at your phone? Particularly if you're in a crowded elevator with people you do not know. Norms and values vary tremendously across cultures and over time. In one society, marital infidelity may not be grounds for divorce. In another society, premarital sex is grounds for stoning women or girls to death, but not men or boys. Another point to remember is that even within a culture, at the same point in time, not all individuals agree about cultural values and norms. We see this particularly when it comes to like legal abortion or gay marriage in many Western societies. There's often a lack of consensus about values and norms in a society. Culture can also define what is perceived as beautiful and ugly, right and wrong, good and bad. So let's talk a little bit about culture versus society. Culture represents the beliefs and practices of a society. Okay? Society represents people who share these beliefs and practices. Neither society nor culture could exist without the other. Culture is both material and non-material culture. Material culture are goods that a society has produced. This is anything physical, from the buildings we call home to the clothing and jewelry that adorn our bodies to the layout of our cities. Non-material culture is intangible. These are ideas created by members of society. Norms, laws, customs, ideas, and beliefs of a group. Non-material culture is less tangible than material culture, but it is as equally strong, if not stronger, presence in social behavior. So think about it. Non-material culture may be a stronger presence than material culture. And oftentimes it really is. Non-material culture oftentimes guides how we use material culture. So non-material culture is found in patterns in everyday life. In some cultures, people eat with utensils, and other people do not use utensils. The belief about whether or not to use utensils is considered non-material culture. In some cultures, people remove their shoes when they enter into their houses, and others people don't. The shoes are a part of material culture, but the belief about whether to remove them or not when entering the home is non-material culture. Culture universals are patterns or traits that are globally common to all societies. So, for example, a family unit would be considered a cultural universal. Human societies recognizes a family structure that regulates sexual reproduction and the care of children. What can vary is how the family unit is defined and how it functions. Generations may live together in one home. Sometimes that's called extended families. You may live as a young adult until you're married, and then their spouse may join them in that same household. In the U.S., one of the things with our family units is we tend to kind of look at ourselves as being nuclear family, where it's just typically the parents and their kids. Other cultural universals include funeral rites. Typically, there's a type of ceremony whenever a funeral occurs. Weddings, and the celebration of birth. This is just some examples of material culture, and you can kind of look at these pictures and figure out what would be considered material culture in these pictures. Characteristics of culture. Culture is shared. The shared nature of culture is what makes human society possible. The concept of culture is a shared way of life that must be distinguished from those of other nations or societies. Many modern societies are multicultural, meaning that people follow various ways of life that blend and sometimes clash. The expression of culture can often include great diversity. Think about the United States. We might have what we call American culture, but this culture varies depending on different groups in society based off of their race, ethnicity, age, gender, religion, class, and other social factors that can also include region. Culture is learned. The process of learning a culture is called socialization. It is taught through direct instructions such as saying yes sir or no sir, how to use silverware. A person learns or becomes a member of culture by absorbing formal and informal values, attitudes, and beliefs of those around them. Until culture is learned, the person is an outsider, whether an infant or an immigrant. Culture is learned directly by someone providing us instructions on how to, for example, eat properly or how to follow the rules. I wanted to go back to where we can talk about how culture can vary, even though we said culture is shared, but it can vary. One of the things is the difference between the South and the North. It's very interesting is because I just recently moved from Alabama, and I was speaking with one of my students, and I was asking her about going shopping and putting things into the shopping cart. Or I didn't call it the shopping cart. I was like, yeah, I had to get a basket. Or did I say cart? I think I said I had to get a cart. And she looked at me like she didn't know what I was talking about. And she was like, a cart? I said, yeah. You know what you push? And I said, what you put your groceries in? She was like, oh, you mean a buggy? And I was like, oh, that's what y'all call it here. So that kind of illustrates how our language patterns, even the things that the material objects that we've identified, sometimes we can even have different names for those material objects. Another example of like we could see differences even within our culture is that persons who live in the North, I shouldn't say all persons, but I know that I've had friends before who have come to the South, and when they ask for tea, they end up getting sweet tea. And I had a friend, she was either from Iowa, Indiana, I can't remember, but it's one of the I states she was from. And when she came down to Texas, she and her family, they asked for tea, and they ended up getting sweet tea. And they were like, what is this? Because that's not what they drink. So we can see the differences even within our own culture. Culture is taken for granted. It is what members of the culture consider normal. We seldom question the culture of which we're a part of. The everyday way of doing things, such as brushing one's teeth or eating, is not questioned. Lack of communication across cultures about what is taken for granted features can have negative consequences. In mainstream Western culture, eye contact is interpreted as attentiveness and honesty. We are taught that we should look people in the eye. when talking. In many other cultures, however, like Asian or Middle Eastern or Native American, eye contact is thought to be disrespectful or rude, and a lack of eye contact does not mean that a person is not paying attention. Culture is also symbolic. Symbols are things or behaviors to which people give meaning. The meaning of symbols depends on the cultural context in which they appear. Symbolic attachments guide human behavior. Symbolic communication is both verbal and nonverbal. In fact, most of one's communication is nonverbal. For example, when we take the U.S. flag, it really is just a decorated piece of cloth. It is not the cloth, but the meaning of the flag of freedom and democracy. Sometimes people in society can have such strong emotions that they feel if the flag or the symbol is being disrespected, the way that they can react to that can be kind of negative sometimes. Like when people maybe burn the flag, you have people who maybe get upset because of the fact that that flag has such a symbolic meaning towards them. Culture varies across time and space. Culture is not fixed. Culture, once again, varies. As people encounter new situations, the culture that emerges is a mixture of the past and the present. Think about the changes of technology that existed and how this has changed culture. For example, just about everyone has cell phones. Think about how different our society was 30 years ago without cell phones, or even the differences when it came to TV. For example, think about how many TV sets we probably have in our house now compared to those persons who lived in the 1950s. They probably just had one. Okay, so we could see how culture can definitely vary. Culture is concrete because we can observe cultural objects and practices that define human experience. Culture links the past to the present.